And now we come to that part of the show where I do a Rick Wakeman on you.
You gonna wear a cape?
Or at least try to. I've got an interesting story to tell you about what happened when the Sin were touring around, I suppose this was 65, 66, I think, something like that. And we'd had some success, and we'd landed the support act spot at the Marquee Club in London as like on a weekly basis, which was quite good because that's when the major bands used to play at the Marquee. And you know, if we were lucky, if there was a good audience that came in as the opening act, you know, on top of the $23 basic that we got between us. It might have been somewhere like 40, which you've got to remember in the 60s was more like, not that much more, but anyway. But you know, it wasn't long after, you know, I don't know, we'd all come out of the World War II thing, and we were kids, and the Beatles had like shown us all a new way of doing things, and you know, we were all caught up in that, so we were happy to, like, you know, really work hard for nothing. Anyway, what happened was we've been we've been traveling around, and it hadn't been a great week. It had been miserably wet and rainy and snowy in some places, and we've been in the north of England, which is rainier and snowier than the south where we lived. And of course, people weren't so keen to come out in those kind of conditions, and it hadn't been a great week for us in terms of making money. In fact, I think we just had enough gas money to get to the Marquee Club, and maybe for like a meager meal after that. So we get there, and you know, and we're thinking, but no problem, because we've been told it's Cliff Bennett and the Rebel Rousers who are playing tonight, and they just had a huge hit with I've Got to Get You Into My Life that Paul McCartney wrote, and there's got to be a good crowd in there, and you know, well, we should get a little bit extra. So you know, we were looking forward to that. So we get our equipment in, and we're there's a band rehearsing on the stage. Now this is very peculiar. I turned to Andrew Jackman and I said, I didn't know they let bands rehearse in the Marquee Club, you know, as a matter of course, because I thought that was one of their rules, and no rehearsals at the club. Yet there was this band rehearsing, and so we brought our amps in, and we were sitting on the chairs and kind of looking at these guys trying to learn this riff, and you know, 10 minutes later they were still trying to learn the same riff, and it just like became very depressing because the guitarist was trying to teach the bass player 6 notes that he couldn't play exactly as it was, and I went, oh my God, this is boring. So I went out the front, and I found the under manager of the club, Jack Barry, his name was, and I said to him, Jack, what's going on? There's this band that's like rehearsing, and we're supposed to set our equipment up in front of Cliff Bennett and the Rebel Rousers. Where's the Cliff Bennett and the Rebel Rousers gear? When are they arriving? And he goes, oh, I don't know, I'll make a phone call. So he called the office, and he said, he said, no, that band, they're the headliners tonight. And I went, well, you're kidding me, right? I wanted to go and take the bass from the bass player and say, no, it's A-G-E-T. Anyway, so we resigned ourselves to the fact that that was the band who were rehearsing. So they left their gear on stage. We set ours up. I went into the dressing room to change my strings like I had gotten wont to do. So I got that nice sparkly Chris Squire sound. Even in the early days, I knew I was me. And thankfully, as time went by, I got them free from Rhoda Sound, but you know, I think I must have spent most of the Sin's budget on new bass strings. Anyway, so I'm in the dressing room changing my strings, and then the guitar player comes in from the band that were rehearsing. And what's peculiar about this is that in those days, guitarists, they talk to other guitar players, and bass players, they talked to each other if they knew each other from various bands, but it was all a bit cliquey generally in London around then. And a guitarist talking to a bass player was completely unknown. That was the first peculiar thing. The second peculiar thing, I'd come from a very middle class kind of white background, and there was a couple of Swaziland guys at my school in another class, and one guy from Egypt or something, but generally I was a very white neighborhood. So this was the first black man I'd ever spoken to in my life, or had spoken to me. So it was kind of novel. And so he's saying to me, well, a buddy of mine's got a piece like that in Seattle. It's real good. And I'm going, oh, okay, very nice. Just and I carry on changing my strings. And we actually end up having about a half-hour conversation. And I leave and I go down to the cafe where the other guys already ordered. And we were all like going, my God, I don't know, this is going to be so depressing. I don't know if we're going to even be able to afford to get home tonight. And then as we were saying that, the line from the Marquee Club started to pass the window of the cafe, and we all went, my God, there's quite a big crowd queuing up there. And we went, dessert, rum baba, 5 forks, and you didn't need much in those days. We all weighed about nothing. And as we fought our way back through this tumultuous line, but by then was like something out of, I don't know, one of those old Charlton Heston movies, the throngs of people. It was just ridiculous. And I saw that the guy who I spoke to earlier, the manager, and he was just taking money hand over fist, and it was crazy. We could hardly get into the club. And we got there, and we got into the dressing room, and we started to get ready to do our show. Now, I have to explain, in those days, the way the club was set up, it was mainly in a U-shaped thing where the stage was here and people were standing all around, and it went a little bit behind the stage. So it was a U-shape, and they had about, the first 4 rows here, like 40 people or something, maybe 50 people that had seats, and then the rest were all standing behind. And so that's the way it was, and the manager of the club, the real manager arrived, and he goes, "Oh, 2 minutes, gentlemen." And he always used to say that, 2 minutes, and they play this theme tune, this jazz thing, and I always remember that went da 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 ba. Anyway, it's so traditional there, and we went on stage. And I walked up to my mic, the normal, like, one, two, like roadies do, and everyone in the world has done ever since for some reason. And I looked down at those seated people in the first few rows, and I went, my God, that looks like George Harrison. Thinking, oh, wait a minute, that's Ringo. and then, my God, that's Mick and Keith and everyone else. And there was Pete Townsend and Steve Winwood and Eric Clapton and all these people who were sitting in the first 4. And we were like, well, for our first song, we'd like to do this, that or the other, or whatever it was. And we did a good set. And after every song, there was good applause. And, we came off stage not quite understanding why we just played to all our heroes who were sitting in the first 4 rows, because there was no explanation for it, really. And I couldn't actually leave the dressing room. The other guys somehow struggled out by pushing the door open and squeezing out. But by the time because I'm always slow and late, I couldn't actually move the door of the dressing room to get out because there were so many bodies jammed against it. So I went on and sat on the stage to see what all this fuss was about. And just as a thing, Pete Townsend, when I got to know him later when Yes worked with The Who, I said to him, you remember that band I was in that opened that night? Were we any good, or was everyone just like, yeah, get off? Or he said, I liked it. Well, I don't think he remembered actually, but anyway. So I couldn't get out. So I went and sat on the piano that was behind the drum kit on the stage, and because of course by now I was completely confused about what the place was packed. We were going to make some money. I mean, more than we'd ever made ever as the opening act that night. And I thought, what the hell is going on? And all my heroes are sitting there. And of course, then Jimi Hendrix came on stage and did his first ever show. And I watched in amazement as all my heroes were like this, and like most of them were like, oh, and then I saw Clapton going, I was God. I like his playing of it. You should have seen his face. Anyway, and it was a fantastic show, and of course that was the first ever performance of the Jimi Hendrix Experience in London. And of course, anyone knew about it. We'd been out of town, had no idea what was going on, and we walked out of there with at least $70 or something, which was amazing for those days. So. Anyway, just as a little addendum to that, all those chicks who never spoke to you before, you've been at the bar, and because you weren't on the right echelon, and after I'd been sitting on that stage with Jimmy that whole night, I bought a lot of drinks after that. And Steve has a little addendum to the whole story, which. It's just kind of interesting.
Well, it is interesting, and it's because a historical note, which I think is important, and that is after the Beatles had watched us sin that night, they went off, and a couple of months later they wrote and recorded Sgt. Pepper's. We haven't received any royalties yet, but it's an important historical note which isn't often known.